Again, Phoenix continues to trend in the right direction in this regard. Demand or absorption, that blue bar, outpaces supply, the orange bar, for the 8th consecutive year in 2018. The Phoenix vacancy rate, that black line there, is well below the historical average. The green dotted line, corporate expansions and relocations are driving a lot of demand, especially at the top of the market for new developments. Job growth in professional and business services and financial activities is well above the national average. In 2018, we had about 3.61 million square feet absorbed. The forecast calls for about just under 3 million square feet to be absorbed in 2019. Again, that looks really good when you look at the supply additions that are going to come online in 2019. You have a really good balance there between supply and demand. Looking at the projected length of office supplies is presupposing that there are no future deliveries based on what's currently available and based on 2018's absorption numbers. Projected length of supply is about 8.3 years. Based on our forecast from 2019 to 2023, which calls for about 2.4 million square feet to be absorbed on average. The projected length of supply is about 12 years. When we look at the average office rent in Phoenix, it grew about 2.5% in 2018. Market slowdown from 2017 when rents grew about 5.1%. Nevertheless, this is still triple the market's historical average. This also outperformed the national average of 2%, which we saw office rents slow nationally as well as in Phoenix. The average rent in Phoenix, just under $25 a square foot. Heavy discount when compared on a national scale. National average is about $33 a square foot. Even greater discount when you compare it to a lot of West Coast markets. When we look at what's under construction, there's about 3.1 million square feet, mostly concentrated in the East Valley, namely Tempe and Chandler. There's a lot of companies out there that will take that space and want to expand your clusters of talent. As we know, those are very dense areas of highly educated communities. And then last here we have sales volume and pricing for office. There were more than 1,000 transactions last year involving office buildings. Sales volume was about $1.23 billion. The average price per square foot was around $200 a square foot. Looks like a drop off from 2017, but the big State Farm portfolio sale at the end of the year kind of inflated those numbers. So when you look at it compared to 2016, we're definitely trending up still. That's it. And over to the panel.
All right, good morning, everyone. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. I'm Andrew Cheney. I'm with Lee & Associates. Please follow me, Instagram, CheneyC2. You can check it right now. Or during some of the other panels that won't be as exciting as ours. Ours is going to be way better than the industrial panel. So, I'm just saying. And these are all my Facebook friends right here. And we're going to be talking about the office market. So, that's right. Yeah, all their bios are in there, but Barry Gable with CBRE does investments. Scott Maxwell with Cressa does mostly office leasing. Kate Morris is with CB as well, and she does medical. And John Duvall with Ryan Companies builds really cool stuff. And I'm over at Lee. I do mostly leasing, help out on a handful of sales that Barry and I have sold, I think, around $1 billion together by this point. So anyway, we also like to wear dark socks. We don't wear any of those colorful socks that you guys see some of the industrial and the retail people wearing. So either that or we wear no socks. But we've got some questions today. The first one could probably take all 45 minutes, but we will try to leave some time for Q&A. And feel free to pipe up or yell at us if you like. But let's start off with the positive focus. Phoenix, it's great, even though it was sub 40 degrees this morning. It's January. It's a great place to be here. And Scott, we'll start with you. You're an Iowa boy, but why choose Phoenix? What are you telling your clients about Phoenix, and what are you selling about Phoenix?
Well, actually, a lot of my clients.
We have really good power here. Wow.
All right, so anyway, like I was saying, power is great here in town. I usually give panels in the dark.
Speak up a little bit.
Okay, I will definitely try to. But Scott, please, again, being the Iowa boy, tell us what you're telling your clients about Phoenix. Why come to Phoenix?
So, Scott Maxwell with Cressa, we do corporate real estate work across the country. We have 50 offices across the country. So we have a lot of inbound business coming into Phoenix, and then we also have a lot of clients that are based here that go elsewhere for their needs, or whether that's a call center or whatever their corporate solution would be. So I would say that Phoenix has a lot of incentives to come here. We're all here, and you all moved here for a specific reason. But more than likely, it was the weather, and it was the opportunity, and affordable housing. It's a great place to be. It's a great place to visit. So all those things we have going for us. The incentives that our government, that being the state, puts in place are actually really good. They're not over the top, but they will bring companies here because they will give them training money if they have an investment into their space and into the company that they have. So the incentives are good enough to bring the companies here. And we're seeing a lot of regional headquarters being created here. And so whether it's Liberty Mutual or State Farm or now Allstate, those are all insurance companies that have just recently located here. But there's others now. RSM, McGladrey, they ended up bringing a national support team in Phoenix. We helped them locate here in Phoenix, and it ended up just being that Phoenix was the best location for them. And then you have Deloitte, who just announced at Rivulon. They're going to be in 100,000 square feet out there, and they're talking upwards of 2,000 jobs. So now you're talking accounting firms, and so we have a lot to offer an office user, and so I think we have to continue to run with that. And you're seeing the supply coming in, the supply that's starting to come online. It's all a lot of it is Class A buildings, and it's going to be you're going to have to pay a little higher freight for those buildings, but it will. We are at a point where we're at 12.5% vacancy. That's music to the ears of most people around here, because we were at 25% in 2013. So it would still be a considerable high number at 12.5% if you were anywhere else but Phoenix. Most markets, you talked to that about as far as.
Right, we'll get more to that specific, and then so that's obviously more the user perspective, and then on the investment perspective, Barry, let's hear your take.
Sure. So thank you for allowing us to be here today. I think that besides the 300 days of sunshine and the average annual temperature of 75 and the average commute of 26 minutes, there are other drivers that make Phoenix an exciting place to be. And the diversification of industry for Phoenix now is as good as I've ever seen, and probably as good as many of you have seen as well. Where traditionally we have been really dependent upon construction and tourism, but today it's about bioscience and biomed technology. It's about aerospace and defense and engineering and healthcare. And so we have a very diversified economy, which is fantastic, and institutional capital really wants that. Our infrastructure has improved significantly. The industrial panel was talking about the 303 and the addition of the 202, and we have the 101 and the 153, and it goes on and on. And it allows the decision makers and the worker bees to commute together to a place where everybody wants to live, work, and play. Also, I think that you're able to acquire office assets in Phoenix for below reproduction costs. And that's a big driver, and we can get into that a little bit later. But one of the points that we all experience here is the affordability of Phoenix. The average home price in Phoenix is $262,000. The average home price in LA County is $625,000, and the average home price in San Francisco is $1.6 million. So the companies that everyone's going to be talking about today that are moving here and expanding here is a big driver for that reason, so that the employees can have affordability and they can have fun and they can enjoy the weather and all the amenities of Phoenix. The last thing I'll add is, you know, I mentioned this last year and I'll mention it again because it's becoming even more and more obvious that Dr. Michael Crow, the president of Arizona State University, and I'm actually giving a huge plug for ASU because I went to the Harvard of the West, just a little south of that, to the U of A, but he's really changed, I believe, the fabric of Phoenix in many, many ways, particularly in downtown, where there's now almost 17,000 students in downtown. And if you haven't been there and you haven't gone to the campus and walked around, it's incredibly exciting to see what's going on. So we're becoming more and more a 24/7 city as well. And that's huge for Phoenix with our first grocer going into downtown. So besides the incentives to get here, there's a host of other reasons to be in Phoenix. Somebody mentioned runway in the previous panel, and I firmly believe that we're on a trajectory that's going to take off. But the last thing I'll say, then I'll be done for the rest of the panel. Won't say anything.
Thank you, Barry.
I'm curious, by a show of hands, how many of you would rather work, live, and play in a different state than Arizona? By a show of hands. So,
He's visiting.
that's a drop the mic.
All right, Kate, question for Kate. Any different perspective in the medical world?
Yeah, and I'll try to talk really loud, high school cheerleader voice. I hope this is enough. So we look at it differently. We look at population growth, obviously. The growing population means we need more doctors, more hospitals, all of that. But Phoenix is a non-CON state, which means you don't have to get permission from the state that looks at, is there enough demand to justify you adding that new clinic or whatever you want to do. You can just go ahead and do it as long as you go ahead and get licensed. So that is very attractive to a group that say may start their surgery centers in Texas. Usually we're the next choice in Arizona. So that is, we're under-doctored, we need more doctors. It's hard to find doctors that want to come here, believe it or not, but they tend to go where their schools or where they went to school. And so we are very glad to be seeing more medical schools going in here and more doctors graduating from here. So we also see, you know, people that come here from Canada in the winter and want their surgeries done. We see people from New Mexico, Vegas, all of those places coming here. This is a medical hub, especially with Mayo Clinic. So for all those reasons, there's going to be more medical here, and there's going to be more expertise, and you're going to see, especially, you know, look at Phoenix Children's, top 5 of all Phoenix, or all children's hospitals in the country. So what an asset. You know, if you have a child with some really poor, bad disease or something, this is the place you're going to go, and you're so glad you live here because you can just be here. So that's our take on it.
Great. And John DePaul is also a transplant. What do you love about Phoenix?
Well, a lot of things, actually, other than the sun. But,
A little higher.
you know, I had to, in 2007, I moved here from the Midwest, and I ran Liberty Property Trust office here until last year when I joined Ryan. So that's a publicly traded REIT. Megan Creasy-Herman, who was on the last panel, worked with me at Liberty, and based on the East Coast, right? So I always had to be selling or competing, if you will, for investment dollars with other parts of the country. So I was pretty good at like telling this story, and then a year after I moved here, the crash hit. So I always tell people, always kind of talk about, when did the housing market peak? When did it bottom? I can tell you when it peaked, is the day that I bought my house in Scottsdale. June 28, 2007. That's the date. So I've been through the cycle here, but one of the things that I found interesting and that really, you know, resonated with the execs on the East Coast for Liberty was that every decade since 1950, Phoenix has been in the top 5 in both job and population growth, including the decade of the Great Crash. Okay, so that's very compelling when you're talking about where are you investing your dollars, where are you building speculative office buildings, where are you building industrial space, and for really everyone in this room. So, and in 1950 or after World War II is when air conditioning became really affordable to the everyday man, so to speak, right? So that's pretty powerful. It's not just a Sun Belt state, it's not just a right to work state. Those are all important, and it's not just nice weather, but that is compelling. 80-some thousand jobs last year. So why Phoenix? Now I think that story's morphed a little bit because it has gotten so, you used to be able to sort of just joke, well, you can kind of make a living being adjacent to California, but it has gotten progressively, like cost of housing, but regulatory environment and taxes and things like that. In California, we literally, we're dealing, all of us here, and I'm sure a lot of you are dealing every day with, in some way, shape, or form, with a company that is either growing here or moving here or opening a new operation here that's based in California, which is in and of itself, as we all know, is the 9th largest economy in the world. So I'm not predicting the demise of California, but they keep legislating and growing and more expensive. So one of the reasons why Phoenix is just because we're adjacent to California, we're going to be the beneficiary of those businesses that need to grow somewhere else. So that's a few of my sort of macro thoughts.
Great, great. So we're now in the longest recovery that we've ever had on record. So a lot of people are saying we're long in the tooth on the cycle. So I want to hear everyone's take on where do you think we are in the office cycle? Who wants to go first? Barry, you're up.
Well, I'm not going to talk about innings. I'd rather talk about the runway. And I feel, our team feels, I think our entire office feels, and hopefully all of you feel, that we've just pushed back from the gate. And we're kind of taxing towards the runway. In the last 90 days, we've met with 4 Asian companies. Last year, we were blessed to sell 28 different office properties, and half of those were to groups we've never sold to before, and half of those are groups that have never been to Arizona before. So we are firm believers that Phoenix has a long runway, and I think that by everything that everyone has just said here, everyone said in the investment panel, people want to be here. And the capital is going to flow here because of yields, because of the ability to buy assets for below reproduction cost, and for the ability to see appreciation. So I'm not an inning guy, I'm more of a runway guy, and I think we're just kind of cruising down, getting almost to the runway, but we haven't even gotten down the runway to take off.
Right. So devil's advocate, and I agree with that, with all that. Maybe the difference in runway time. Let's say I'm concerned investor got scorned in the last cycle, and I say, yeah, Barry, that's we wanted to grow forever, a longer time, but we've got Trump in office, we got Brexit, we got government shutdown. I mean, really, how can we have that much longer? What's your response to concerned investors like that?
Well, I think that what you need to do is you need to compare where their dollars can go otherwise, and what economies they're working with in those other markets. And I think diversification of our economy here, I think the ability to live here and live comfortably, and I think the ability to continue to put dollars into this market to see growth, as opposed to going into these coastal markets where everybody's getting priced out. So the institutional capital flow into Phoenix has never been greater in my 33 or 34 years in the business. So they're smart people, and lenders are getting it. And so, again, my response would be, where else would you rather be? And where do you believe you have the biggest opportunity for upside?
Great. Scott?
Well,
You stick good with everything I said.
he's really good. So, Barry said it well. I think that obviously L.A. Pollock is bullish. He had plenty of great things to say. In the industrial panel, I think they're in a little different spot than the office market is, only because of the demand on e-commerce and how that plays into the industrial market. Having said that, the fact that we are priced under what reconstruction would be for that specific building, if you will. I alluded to it before, which is a lot of the things that are getting built now are more of the Class A properties, unless it's a build-to-suit. You look at McKesson, what Ryan did with McKesson out on the 101 is a tremendous story. You know, they were in Old Town Scottsdale, and they decided they wanted to continue to expand here, and they did. And so when you have that kind of thing going on, they're going on their third building now. They're going to take a good chunk of that, if not all of it, or all of it now. So, you know, again, they started with one, they did two, and now they're up to their third building. You got Freedom Financial, who started with 150,000. They did another 150,000, and now they got 300,000 right on the 101 and 202. You got Benchmark, which is going in right behind them for about 150,000 square feet. So a lot of deals that are happening. I would say that, and they're continuing to happen. There's still probably 3 million square feet of potential users out in the market, and there's about 3 million under construction right now. And that doesn't include some of the projects that are coming online, like the Union, which Lincoln Property's doing, which kind of akin to what they're doing at the Grand in Mesa. So the Grand's in Tempe and the Union's in Mesa. So, you know, it is. I would say, if I had to do an inning, I'd say maybe the fifth inning. I mean, I feel very comfortable. I mean, you saw what happened in the World Series. You know, how long did that go? 18 innings or whatever it was. I mean, we might have that. So anyway, I feel very bullish, and there's nothing kind of showing me that anything's going wrong. Vacancy's going down. Rates are increasing slightly. It's modest. If you want to jump up to that next level, if you will, the new build, you're going to pay for it. But there's companies that are doing that. So,
Okay,
John, go ahead. Add a little bit to that. Sorry to interrupt. This is, you know, I don't like the inning analogy either, but I did hear Warren Buffett say, you know, not too long ago, who's to say that maybe we're in the 8th inning, but who's to say we're not in a doubleheader? We're not playing a doubleheader, right?
Right.
So I think like the capital has been so much more constrained. When I moved here in 2007, we owned a lot of stuff in the Cotton Center on the south side of the airport. I went across the street, and I came from the Midwest to look at this park, South Bank, and someone had just put 6 identical spec buildings up at one time, right? So, and they all sat there vacant for years. And the point is that capital and the supply and demand dynamics are so much more imbalanced than they were before the last cycle. And demand is still, you know, CD is tracking 90 to 100 users over 100,000 square feet, over 50,000 square feet, which is at their all-time highs. So the big national companies that tend to do a lot of deals here, may not be headquartered here, but that do a lot of deals here, don't seem to be overly concerned or worried about the shutdown, tariffs and things like that. But that is going to have an effect eventually. But anyway, the supply and demand is in check here. And the key that I'm always asking brokers about is how does demand feel? How is it feeling today? Are people making decisions? So that's pretty healthy because capital has had a lot more constraint than last time. We're not immune to any national kind of shock though. So things that happen in the White House in particular do concern me, and I'm always asking our potential clients what they're thinking about that. If they're not worried, then I'm not worried, right? We have demand, we're good. So far it feels pretty good. Sorry.
No, that was perfect because ours is so different. You know, right now the hospital systems have capital, they're building. You saw Mayo's expanding, Chandler is getting a new hospital at Banner, Honor Health's doing a new hospital up north, Deer Valley area. So they all have money right now. They're getting reimbursed. It's a good time, but it just takes the government to change the reimbursements, or you know, all of a sudden you thought you were going to get X amount for the service that you're providing in this particular building, and they say, no, we're going to cut that in half now next year. And there's no control over it. You just have to go with whatever they say. So that can stop the hospital systems, the doctors, the surgeons, all in their tracks when that happens. And so they did so much of waiting around for the ACA to get passed and wondering what was going to happen. Now they're not waiting anymore. They're moving forward strategically. But I think that there's always in the back of their minds that caution about what could be pulled out from under the rug.
And I would imagine on the medical side with the aging population, there's a lot of potential demand coming up.
Yeah,
Right.
and even the non-aging, you know, you've got, everyone gets sick, so everyone's going to need some type of care. And so it's only going to get more and more. The question is, how much of that are the insurance companies going to pull back on and say, listen, I'm not gonna let you give 7 or 8 different tests to this person. You're gonna get 2, and then the rest has to be taken care of by the person. So that's what I see.
Right. So let's talk about lease rates, and lease rates have obviously been going up everywhere. And to give a couple of quick examples, last cycle I did a lease at Hayden Ferry Lakeside 2. It was the very top of the market. It was a $33 start rate, and they just did a $45 a square foot lease rate. And South Scottsdale did plenty of deals in '09, and they were sub 20 a square foot, or right at 20, 21, including the Galleria, and now they're asking $42 a square foot there, and most of those buildings are asking 35, 36. And so you've got a couple things. Construction pricing is obviously affecting rates, and then because we are long in the cycle, a lot of investors, bankers are worried about building spec and building new product. So give me your thoughts on those two.
Obviously rates have gone up considerably, and as you just showed, if you looked at Hayden Ferry, that's a 33% increase. Obviously Galleria, it's kind of morphed into something different from what it was, and there's been a lot of capital. I will say that the landlords and those who hold the properties have been pumping money into their properties, and they're trying to be able to demand those higher rates. At 24th and Camelback, we have a lot of renovations going on at the Esplanade. We've got renovations at Northern Trust. Obviously, 24th and Camelback was the most recently built property there, and just traded 300 a foot.
Yes, it was a $100 million sale, and it traded for $331 a foot.
So with the increase in rates, I think that you're also getting an increase in the quality of asset. That a lot of that money wasn't spent in the mid 2000s, call it, or late 2010, 2011. Not a lot of money was being put into properties at that point. With the obviously lower vacancy rate, people coming into those properties and demanding more amenities, the landlords have kind of answered to that, and in lieu of that, they want obviously a higher rate, and they're having to compete with other new projects going on. Obviously Hayden Ferry Lakeside, they had another tower go up, and that was leased fairly rapidly. So you got a few more projects going on down there. I mean, there's 7 or 8 new projects, and I'll let John kind of talk, or Andrew talk to those that are coming in, but we will see a new skyline down in Tempe of different sorts. So.
Yeah, so actually I want to go to Barry, but Barry, how are those conversations going with your investors who have got existing buildings or looking at buying an existing building? They think they're paying a lot because of where rates are going, but then you have the construction conversation. Again, we talked about basically new construction and tenant demand is right about even, and so our vacancy is going to keep going down. I think it's staying the same, going down a little bit. But how do those conversations go?
Well, I think you have to look at what's the alternative for the tenant. If the tenant wants nice space, they're going to have to pay a healthy price. And if the landlord is taking care of the tenant, and if management engineering is doing a fabulous job, the tenant is less likely to want to move. So if the landlord is pumping dollars into the building to make it cool and creative and have tenant lounges and do all the neat amenity space, they're able to definitely maintain their rate and push it. But if a tenant wants to downgrade their image, then they're going to move into another building. But are they really going to move into another building for $3 to $5 less? And are they going to move into a nicer building and have to pay $6 to $8 a foot more, or maybe 10, to get into a newer product? So our feeling is that as long as the landlord does what he's supposed to do, she does what she's supposed to do, maintains and manages the asset appropriately, has walkable amenities, be able to put checks in all of the right boxes, the tenant retention that we've been seeing for the last 3 years, for the most part in every building, is averaged about 86%. We underwrite between 70 and 75% retention. We've also seen in the last 2 years, in Tempe, Scottsdale, Camelback corridor, we have seen rental increase in some cases, in some buildings, by almost 50%, but by averaging about 30% rate increase. So to the tenant, it's difficult for tenants to move. They're not, we have found, they're typically not going to move for a couple bucks and save a couple dollars. It's not going to happen. So what we do to investors is we show them the historical rates, and if you have 3 to 5, 6 new deals that are getting renewed, or new deals that are coming into the building at, let's say as an example, $32, and the average rate in the building is 26, there's a story, and you can sell that hard.
Right. So construction pricing, we all know there's an epidemic going on. I think there's some GCs in here, and they're kind of going like this. But a small example, I had a 2,000-foot law firm. They want to go and relocate to a very nice Scottsdale building, not the best, but that TI to build out, 80% offices. Granted, it's a lot of offices, but that was $75 a square foot. Okay, when it should cost 40, 50, or at least we think so. And then obviously the differential gets smaller the larger the tenant goes, but a lot of build outs that can be done for $45 a square foot now it's between 55 and 60. So it's a huge problem, and I don't know, a lot of my deals, and John, is the construction pricing going to be fixed anytime soon?
Yeah, so that's a great, I mentioned earlier that one of the reasons that I think supply and demand is in pretty good shape is that there's plenty of capital, but it's prudent capital, in this part of the cycle. So, they're not doing 6 spec buildings at a time, but the other reason that the markets, in my opinion, are in decent equilibrium is because of construction pricing and rent. They've been going up on average 10% a year, and rents have been going up 3 to 5%, right? So that's a problem for someone who does what I do. So I believe that rents have to go up, but they have to go up at a higher rate.
Right.
But to answer your question about construction pricing, I spoke with, obviously, we're a contractor, and I have some data points that I thought were very interesting, sort of that people might find interesting for this topic. So, yeah, last year, overall construction went up on average 10% last year. Okay, so at times last summer and fall, it felt more frothy than that because some of the trades, the biggest driver isn't so much materials, it's the lack of labor. So labor is I'm sure I'm telling a lot of you things that you already know or know better than I do, but labor with our subs and our trades is it's a crisis, okay? So not to get political, but to think we need to keep more, that we don't need more people coming into our country, that's just a travesty. Like, it's going to cost us a lot more money. So but the good thing is that in the fourth quarter last year, that did seem to calm down. So over the last couple of months, the construction price increase issue has plateaued. We're even hearing anecdotes of some trades, maybe lumber and carpentry, a few things, actually going back down a little bit. So there's hope at the end of the tunnel, I think, but last year was so disruptive because of concrete, then the threat of tariffs if you got steel from Canada, the tariffs were an issue, but it wasn't actually the driving issue. It really is labor and lack of crews. So I do believe that it's stabilizing. But to give you here's a data point, right? So when I was at Liberty, I built a park called Liberty at Rio Salado that Barry sold for us just a couple of months ago. Built 1 million feet in 4 years. The last building was a 240 acre. Centene moved into that building 12 months ago exactly. Big insurance company, a lot of people in there. If we were to build that same building today, just nothing changed, it would cost 10% more than it did a year ago. Okay, so it's not 20% like you might have heard, but that's significant. The rents are going up 3 to 5%. I think rents have to go up more, but we're hearing now that things are plateauing and hopefully calming down a little bit.
Great. So Kate, are doctors just used to these big TI allowances or coming out of pocket, so it's no big deal for them, or how is it in your world?
Yeah, that's what's happening because our build-outs are, for a typical clinic, it's around $95 a square foot now. A wound care I got the other day, a wound care clinic was $143. And then anytime you're trying to do a surgery center, you're up at $250 a square foot. So the doctors and the hospital systems, whoever's doing it, they know they're gonna have to kick in. The landlord I've seen go as high as maybe $75 a square foot he'll put in. And then after that amount, he's saying, I'll amortize it into the rent for you, but I can't give you any more. I won't even raise my rent accordingly. I'm just gonna add interest to it and push your rent is raised anyway. But so there is, I think, gonna be a breaking point where they're just gonna have to settle, some doctor groups that are maybe breaking off from another, they're gonna have to pick a spot that's already got sinks, already got what they need, maybe just try to refresh it a little bit. But people trying to do their own buildings, all of that, they're gonna have to put a lot of their own money in.
Agreed. We're going to have a couple more questions, and I think we can open up for some audience questions. But flexibility is another big thing in the office world. So you've got a lot of companies with very little money, and then also some companies with a lot of money coming to this nice new building and saying, yeah, we'd like a 3-year lease because we're afraid that we're going to grow out of it in a little bit. And so it's tough to get buildings financed that way, obviously, and then making deals. So I want to hear your take on how that's affecting your lives, your transactions. And then that's going to get into co-working. And I want to hear how does everyone think that WeWork and a lot of these guys are going to survive the next cycle, or will any of them go away?
Well, from the standpoint of investment sale, when you're selling an asset and some of the tenants have early termination, we don't like those. But however, there's a couple of, we always just try to find the story as best we can with every property and with every tenant. And oftentimes the big corporations today, they are concerned about what their future may hold and what the economy will do long term. And so they ask for right to termination. They may sign a 10-year deal and ask for an out after 5, or they sign a 7 after and ask for a right after 5. But what we see is a lot of 5 years too. And they're asking for a termination right after the 3rd year. And so long as there is at least a year's notice, and so long as there's some recapture of costs, some sort of a penalty to, in a perfect world, provide for, let's call it a year of rent or close. You get a year's notice and you get a year's rent. We're usually able to hold the hands of a buyer and have them feel relatively comfortable, particularly if the space is nice and cool, particularly if the in-place rent at the time of that right of termination is lower than market. That's a good thing. And particularly if that tenant has been in the building for historic reference of time, where we can say, yes, this 15,000 foot tenant does have a right to terminate, but they've also been in the building for 9 years. And previously they were in their previous building for 17 years. So there's a lot to it. Ideally, no termination options. I will just talk very briefly. On a single tenant deal in particular, you want to have solid leases. We were blessed to work with John on the Liberty Property Trust portfolio sale, and he structured those leases perfectly. They were creditworthy tenancy, they were firm, good, strong leases. There were a couple that did have some outs, but they had massive penalties. And that portfolio sold for $255 million, and it averaged $317 a foot, even with some of those termination options. The buildings were quality, individual parking, 6 per 1,000 parking, 6 per 1,000.
Whoa. Yeah. All right, that's it. We got to go.
I can actually hear us now.
Yeah.
So at any rate,
Yeah.
it's not an end all. You just have to be creative and work around it.
Right. So that's why we all have jobs here. Scott, how about on the tenant rep side?
Well, on the tenant side, we always try to match, obviously, we look at the business first and then we try to match the real estate to it. And a lot of times, the business plan of a particular company may not coincide with a 10-year lease or a 7-year lease, or what's their trajectory? What's the availability within the building adjacent to the space that they're taking? Those are all really important questions if you're looking at it from a corporate user standpoint, rather than a landlord who wants to sell his building someday. I don't have much interest in what their needs are. I look at my client's needs first. But
See,
but now
very selfish. Gonna heckle you there.
My point is that I have to look at my client's needs first, and then I try to figure out what the issues are on the landlord level, and we try to match those up the best we can. And so you have to understand. You have to go to the landlord. You have to go to John and say, what is your thoughts with this particular property? Are you taking it to market anytime soon? And so we try to match those demands. If that's the priority as far as that particular building for my client, then we'll obviously get very serious about that conversation. If he's 2 or 3 down the list because there's 7 different options in the market, then they may have to talk about a termination option. We don't have a problem paying penalties maybe not. We don't mind paying unamortized free rent and unamortized TIs above and beyond what it would have taken to get any other tenant in there. So that's what when we start throwing around numbers of $50 a foot, $75 a foot, that's taking it down to basically a gray shell and then rebuilding that space. If you're going into second gen space, you might still only be spending $25, $30 a foot, and then all of a sudden a 3-year deal becomes palatable to the landlord because they say, okay, I can deal with that, right? If I can get by with $8 to $10 a year for TIs, knowing that I'm going to be able to release that space because I didn't do anything dramatic like a doctor where he had to put in special equipment and everything else, you have a destination, truly a destination. Yeah. The corporate user for office, they can go to any building based on, it's more about location strategy for their employees. Where do their employees live? Where are they trying to get their workforce? So their workforce is more important than how nice that building is. It's what is my commute time? So if we're going to analyze a building, we're going to look at all the different parameters, but obviously, the term of lease has to coincide with what their business model is.
Right. So are doctors the opposite these days, just because they have so much more?
Yeah,
an office tenant's going to put in maybe $10-20 a square foot more into their space. The doctor is going to put $100 a foot more. So they're asking for the 10-12-year leases.
They're asking for the 10-year leases. I have one client that insists on having a 5-year out, but they pay penalties and all of that. But yeah, doctors tend not to move because if you move more than a mile or 2, you lose patients. And so they'll be there 10, 20, 30 years in a spot in some cases. Now that's changing a little bit with this flight to retail if you're a primary care or maybe a pediatrician. But again, then you're going to go to that new retail site and you're going to stay there for 10, 20 years because people always want to go back to the same spot.
Right. Let's. I do want to ask the co-working question again. What does everyone think? Are these WeWorks of the world, all these other groups that are popping up around town, can they survive the next cycle? What do you guys think about co-working?
I'll give you a couple of thoughts on that. I mean, it's a very difficult thing for landlords and developers to underwrite right now, right? And I don't think anybody really has the answer to that. In some levels, especially the traditional WeWork space, where a lot of small and medium-sized users, we tend to build buildings where we have bigger tenants, so they don't really compete with us. But some landlords have that concern. They're asking for double the market tenant improvement allowances, $100 plus per square foot. How good is their credit? There's just so many questions there. CD recently did a study where, the effect on cap rates for your exit, that's a big issue or a concern. It may be not as dramatic of a hit to your cap rate as we probably thought, but once you if they're over 1/3 to 40% of a building, there is a hit to the cap rate, it appears. So, and they have not made it through a recession, right? The old-fashioned Regis has been bankrupt 4 times or something, right? So, now this is definitely a different model than Regis, but so all those are like concerns. But think about it on the other hand. They're going to lease 500,000 feet at least in this market this year, right? They just did their first lease at the Esplanade, but there's several more coming. They're the largest landlord tenant in Manhattan. So from that end of the spectrum, people like me, I feel like we have to figure out how to do business with them. I think it's particularly brilliant that Macerich is doing an industrious lease in Fashion Square. You know, that's their best performing mall. Man, you walk through there some days and that is dead. So getting 30,000 square feet of office users inside a mall with a food court and all the other, I think it's great. I think it's a great investment, sort of a beta test to see how that goes. I know CD's office in San Diego, Paul was moderating the last panel, they're like in a retail set. Like, I think that idea is really smart. So I think there's a lot of ways that this can go, but we can't tell you got our arms around the whole thing yet. But I don't think it's going away.
Go ahead. Are you going to say something?
No.
Okay. I would just add that the WeWork people were just into our office, actually, and they were talking about their model, and John is 100% correct. They're going to be having 3 offices, one in Tempe, one at the Esplanade, one downtown. And they're making a big bet on Phoenix, and they're making a big bet because of all the reasons that we've said why Phoenix. What they're finding, very interesting, is there are major corporations that are expanding, but they can't get the build out fast enough to accommodate their growth. So a lot of these WeWork spaces are being used for swing space.
Enterprise space, they're calling that too.
Enterprise space, yeah. And so that's actually a very interesting business model for them. So they'll do short-term leases and work with these major corporations, and they're finding that they're doing a lot with Google and Amazon right now. And they have them in millions and millions and millions of square feet because of their flexibility. So I think, in my opinion, the model is a very interesting model, and I think it's one to stay.
Scott, any other thoughts?
Temporary space, I mean, I kind of view it as temporary space, and some people might not see it that way, but I mean, when you start talking about swing space or enterprise space, that's what you're really talking about. So it's giving someone a strong enough foothold within a market to then figure out what they're going to do as far as a need for space. And it may be that they decide that they don't need office space here. And you know, there's been a lot of companies that have come here and then all of a sudden they're gone. And you go, what happened? Well, maybe they should have tested the market first. And I could say that probably more about other markets in the United States than Phoenix, because I don't think that's really where we're at. But there are a lot of markets in Phoenix where, other than Phoenix, where you might want to test the waters. Now, does WeWork want to go into Albuquerque? I don't know. I mean, you know, where is that going to be? Regis has obviously, you know, pulled the trigger on a lot of different locations and try to figure out where the winners and the losers are. I don't know if like a WeWork or a Workuity, or you know, you got Serendipity, which is right across the street at the new collection right next to the AC Hotel. They're opening up there, so you're going to see some competition going on amongst these groups, and it'll be interesting to see where it goes. But with the level of TI that they're putting in, it's not like they're going to just want to pack up and leave, right? So they're making a heavy investment. It'll come through the pricing. You know, if you talk to anybody that's ever been in a Regis, which I think is at a slightly lower level. I don't know if anybody from Regis is in here, but definitely it's not at that level. They're going to say that it was extremely expensive to be there, and usually when people add up everything that they spend at their office, when they get the phone and they get the internet and they get, you know, all the different things, including, you know, what the landlord charges for parking, what have you, they figure out that it's probably not as expensive as they might think.
I would just add, Regis is here to stay. Because not everybody wants to be in the creative office environment. Right. Not everybody wants to work with somebody that's in flip-flops and brings their dog to the office. I mean, it's just true. And so, as such, Regis is actually doing very well. They have 2 offices in the Camelback Quarter, one down in two in Scottsdale that I'm aware of. Both are at minimum at 85 to 90% occupancy. So I think Regis is going to do fine.
Right, and it's somewhat of a different product. I mean, you're getting your own office where you can lock the door, and some of these others are not so.
Great, we've got to wrap it up. We did find out that it was the industrial panel that cut the power. They were trying to.
They needed too much power.
They were trying to make their panel better than ours, but they didn't. Ours is way better. I'm sorry we don't have time for questions, but we will be performing at Comerica Theater this Friday night. Ticketmaster.com/CCIM IREM. Thank you all for coming.